Well, it's another rainy day in West Lancs, so what better time to talk about solar power. Welcome to the channel. I'm Chris, and this is the first in a series of videos on our experience getting started with solar power. This time we're going to be looking at the reasons why we invested in solar, how we went about it, and what our expectations were. We'll then look at the system we chose and present some data for our first month's usage. In upcoming videos, we'll be doing a 6-month review, including monthly generation, consumption and export figures, looking at any issues and considering possible future enhancements. So make sure you subscribe and click the bell notification icon so you don't miss out. This video comprises 4 chapters, so feel free to jump ahead to any particular one. The start time for each chapter is shown on the screen now. Hope you enjoy. So why did we invest in solar? Well, it would be almost impossible not to be aware of the increase in energy costs over the last 12 to 16 months. Gone are the days of those cheap fixed tariffs, well, at least for the time being, as Martin Lewis does think they may make a return later this year. We're now on capped rates which, even after the support from the energy price guarantee, have seen our energy bills increase to almost 2.5 times as much as we were paying just a couple of years ago. After increasing food prices, higher energy bills are the next highest contributor to rising living costs. Anything that could help us reduce our energy costs has got to be worth considering. Another reason for us investing in solar was climate change. Now, whether you're a climate change denier, skeptic, or follow the science like myself, that's entirely up to you. But when I look at the data and see carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere increasing year after year, and then see the resulting impact on our weather systems and natural environment, I'm personally convinced that we need to move away from our dependency on carbon-based fuels. Reducing our carbon footprint, however a small reduction any one individual person can make, was something very important to us. No discussion about energy is complete without thinking about energy security. The availability of Russian gas or how well China's economic growth is going are factors influencing energy availability that are totally outside of any individual's personal control. With Tweedledee and Tweedledum there potentially teaming up to cause more trouble around the world, it's my view that we just can't afford to rely on their goodwill to ensure we have energy sufficient for our needs. It's time, therefore, for us to look to generate more of our own energy, whether that's by nuclear, wind turbine or solar. And at an individual level, solar is the only realistic option we have to make a difference. And finally, we have to think about cost. Not the cost of buying energy, but the cost of investing in a solar energy system. Over the last 2 decades, we've seen the cost per watt of solar panels gradually decline, such that panels now cost 1/10 per watt of what they used to. Whilst technology improvements may continue to drive that cost down further, the cost of panels today is probably no longer a reason to delay investing. Our consideration of investing in solar really kicked off again about a year ago, so that's March 22. That followed a long period of very low interest rates. My thinking was, if I've got some money put by, what's the point of putting it into a savings account that's giving very little interest? Why not invest it and put it on my roof instead? Whilst interest rates have risen somewhat since making that decision, the combination of the preceding 4 factors were the driving force behind us moving ahead with solar. With all those compelling reasons, why hadn't we done it already? Well, we'd always thought our location wasn't best suited to benefit from solar power. We're in West Lancashire, that's in the northwest of England, and our thought was, is it really sunny enough? Certainly, if you compare the amount of sun that we get here with some areas of the south coast of England, it looks like there's a big difference. In practice though, as we'll see over the next couple of slides, that difference isn't as significant as we initially thought. The second reason was We'd always believed that you really needed a south-facing roof, and as you can see, we just don't have one. We have a complicated, fairly steeply angled roof that's got 6 different sections, 2 of which are sort of semi-dormers. We get sun in the morning from the east, and as the sun moves across the sky, it shines directly onto the front gable of the house, before in the evening moving round to the west. Whilst the east and west facing sections of the roof get good sun from early in the morning to late at night respectively, the south gable doesn't get that much, not until the sun is quite high in the sky, which is typically from about April through to September. The obvious question then is, would we get enough sun to make it worth our while? Although for us, the exact payback period wasn't the overriding consideration in investing in solar, we did want to see at least some positive cost benefit over the lifetime of the system. A quick look around indicated various payback periods, with figures quoted anywhere between 7 to 12 years. Where could we get some reasonable, unbiased information then? Around 3 years ago, I had looked at the Energy Saving Trust Solar Energy Calculator. I'd put in the various parameters, roof slope of about 40 degrees, very little shading, location and orientation of the house, etc. On the assumption that we were likely to end up with a typical medium-sized installation of around 4 kilowatt peak, we ran the numbers. And to be honest, the answers at that time weren't really very compelling, with the result that I put it on the back burner and sort of forgot about it. Then, about a year ago, with energy prices going up and all the other factors discussed earlier, I thought it was a good time to revisit this. An initial projection of around 3,500 kilowatt hours annual output suggested solar was definitely worth another look. So I thought I'd do a few simple calculations of my own. I took what looked like a reasonable projected annual output figure of between 3,400 to 3,500 kilowatt hours, which we could reasonably expect in this area based on the Energy Savings Trust figures, and looked at what the annual benefit would be on our Octopus Energy fixed rate tariff at the time. Calculate that over a typical system lifetime of 25 years, and then put in the initial cost, ballpark £10,000 at the time. Obviously it was going to be a little more or a little less depending on the system that we might ultimately go with. Incorporate a figure for lifetime maintenance, and here I suspect we've been a little bit optimistic. The figure of £1,500 was based on the Energy Savings Trust assumptions, but I don't think that really took into account the potential for having to replace batteries with their typical 10-year lifespan. But be that as it may, we did the calculation and we came up with a lifetime benefit of around £4,000. Whilst it wasn't huge, at least it was positive. Jumping forward to May 22, the first price rises have started to kick in, and we've been moved on to a flexible tariff, again with Octopus. See how that benefit figure has jumped up? It's now £14,000 over the lifetime of the system. Go forward again to October 22, this is after our decision and actually getting the panels installed, and it's gone up again. Even taking into account the Energy Bills Support Scheme, we're looking at something like a £20,000 net benefit over the lifetime of the panels. Even though I liked the look of my own calculations, I did a little more looking around and found this data, which gives the average break-even point for the UK of around 10 years. But what about the Northwest? Well, actually, it's not that much worse than anywhere else in the country. Yes, it's around a year longer than East Anglia or the South East, but it's still pretty good, and I don't believe those figures fully take into account the benefits from battery storage. All of this pretty much convinced us that it was time to take the plunge. We could fine-tune those numbers once we'd got some better data and once we'd spec the system. Time to get some quotes then. The oft-quoted wisdom when having some building work or renovations done at home is to get 3 quotes. Whilst this is the approach I followed, the first thing that quickly became apparent was that most suppliers were offering completely different hardware. So any true like-for-like comparison was going to be difficult. The second thing was that, even within the short period of 2 to 3 months when I was getting quotes, suppliers were changing the models of panels, inverters and batteries that they were quoting. Now, reasons given for this were mainly down to problems in the supply chain, but I also think that the pace of change in this industry led to some of this flux. How did I choose where to get quotes from? Well, in the main, I primarily looked at companies that were relatively local, i.e. based in the northwest of England, within a 25 to 30 mile radius of where we live. Why did I do that rather than going for a big national company? Well, my thinking was that if we were having significant issues with the system once it was installed, I wanted the ability to jump in the car, drive to the company offices and speak face to face with someone. Remote telephone and email support is all very good, but you can't beat a good face-to-face conversation. From that starting point, I then looked at various company websites that were thrown up by Google and started making a list, not just of possible companies, but also of the hardware and software offerings. Whilst I gleaned a lot from looking at websites, both of suppliers and manufacturers, I found YouTube invaluable. Although at that time a lot of the content was US or Australia centric, i.e. places where the sun shines a lot, the general points were still pretty relevant. One of the first points to come out of this was the confirmation of my own thoughts that battery storage was the key to having an efficient and productive system. After a couple of weeks, I'd narrowed it down to 4 or 5 local suppliers, had a good idea of what I was looking for and the likely budget we'd be faced with, so I dove in and requested some quotes. Whilst I approached 5 companies in total, I actually only succeeded in getting 3 quotes. Most of the companies responded by saying they were very busy, which is fair comment, but taking the 3 that quoted, I got a variety of solutions that were proposed. These ranged from Fox ESS to Solis and Pylontech to GrowWatt. I've laid them out in this table but won't go through them in detail. However, one of the issues I was immediately faced with is how do you actually compare them when they're not exactly like for like? Initially, I looked at a cost comparison based on the wattage of solar panels that were installed, but that didn't really feel right because there's so much more to the system than just the solar panels. I also looked at the wattage of battery capacity installed, but that has exactly the same issue. In the end, my thought was what the most important thing that the system is going to generate is the output. So that's what I used for my cost comparison. You can see the figures on the bottom line of the table. They range from just above £3 to around £4 per kilowatt hour annual output. Taking quote 1 first, i.e. the Fox ESS system, the supplier was good. They answered my questions. I liked the panel, having looked at the technical information behind it. It had the lowest cost per kilowatt hour projected output and what appeared to be good remote monitoring capabilities. A couple of things swayed me against them though. The company never really convinced me how they could fit 14 of those panels on my roof, and that's pretty fundamental. No matter how much I pushed them, they didn't really answer with any confidence. No doubt it would have been confirmed during an on-site survey, but I didn't want to get that far down the line and then find out they couldn't do it. Also, halfway through the quoting process, the battery configuration was changed, which bumped the price up by £1,500. With a little bit of confusion in the quote around the inverter, maybe it was me, maybe it was them, it just didn't hang together enough for me. So in summary, it was a good offer, certainly worthy of consideration, and probably a very good system, but with a few open questions, and so maybe not. Jumping ahead to quote 3, the GrowWatt system. Again, a long-standing supplier, been in business for over 15 years, offering a very good panel, the Trina Solar, in my mind anyway, but just too busy to give me a formal quote. Gave me a verbal price and said if I was interested, then get back to them. But how can you be interested when you don't get the information you need to look at things in detail? Disappointed would be how I would sum that experience up. Again, I'm sure that you can get a very good system using GrowWatt components, but by this time I was wanting to make some firm progress and didn't want to have to wait for an unknown amount of time for another quote to come. Okay, quote 2, and it will quickly become apparent that this became my favoured system. A long-time supplier, not just focusing on solar, but also other energy improvement solutions for both residential and commercial markets. Been in business for 30 plus years. Very responsive, answered my questions, had good conversations on the phone. That built my confidence that there was someone I could deal with. I really like the Solis inverter with the LCD display. Now I know that a lot of inverters have front panel displays which allow you to view or change the data, but the Solis LCD graphical display was really attractive to both myself and my wife. Here was something that allowed us to walk into the garage where the inverter was going to be installed, press some buttons and quickly see what's happening. If the remote monitoring ended up not being as good or as reliable as promised, we could just go and have a look at the inverter. This was a big plus for us. The Pylontech modular battery. I really like that, with numerous reviews on YouTube of people recommending the Solis Inverter Pylontech battery combination. I gained a lot of confidence that we weren't being sold something that didn't work. The remote monitoring also looked pretty good, with Solis Cloud available on the web and also in an app. The functionality looked pretty comprehensive all told. Unfortunately, this system had the highest cost per kilowatt hour projected output. Not so good then. And ideally, I would have liked 400 watt panels rather than the 375 watt that we were being proposed. But maybe you can't have everything. Now that I was getting close to a decision, it was time for the salesman to sharpen his pencil. Some people might not be comfortable with a little bit of haggling, but when you're spending this much money, there can be no harm trying. Whilst I would never share a competitor's quote with another supplier, although I know some people do, it's not unreasonable, at least in my mind, to give an indication of what they're up against. After a bit of back and forth discussion about cost, pros and cons, etc., we got the system priced down to just a shade under 11k, which was a significant reduction from where we started. That pushed the cost per kilowatt hour projected annual output down to a much more reasonable figure. Still not the cheapest, but it was in the ballpark, and that was enough for us to make a decision. Time then for a more detailed look at the system we ended up with. We've got two banks of 6 375 watt Jinko solar panels, 6 on the east facing roof and 6 on the west facing roof. That gives us 4.5 kilowatt peak installed capacity. There's good coverage of the sun from early in the morning to late at night. However, we don't get the maximum benefit when the sun is directly from the south, unless it's high in the sky. Could we have squeezed more panels on? Possibly, but we wanted to ensure we still had sufficient access for future maintenance, not just of the panels, but of the roof itself. I did think about the possibility of mounting a couple of panels on the south-facing gable itself, but aesthetics have won out on that one for the moment. The inverter and batteries are both installed in the garage. There was initially some discussion with the supplier about putting everything in the loft, but that just didn't feel the right solution for us. For a start, our main consumer unit is on the other side of that wall, so it was a nice easy connection into that. Also, we just didn't fancy the idea of having to go up into the loft to look at the inverter in case there were any issues. As I outlined earlier, one of the key features of the Solis inverter for us was the graphical LCD display panel, so it didn't make much sense to then install the system in the loft and have to get the loft ladder down, crawl up into the loft to look at it. There are two 3.5 kilowatt batteries, giving a total capacity of 7 kilowatt hours, currently just positioned on a piece of plywood on the floor. At some point, I'll probably look to get or make a rack that would allow them to be stacked, especially if or when we consider getting a third battery module. Inverter and various ancillaries are all mounted on a backboard, as shown. Coming from an electrical background myself, I was very keen that we get a nice and neat installation, and was very pleased with the end result. Okay then, how long did all of this take? Well, we really started digging into the research around mid-April 22, although we had started looking a little bit before that, albeit in a bit of an ad hoc manner. I spent a couple of weeks doing that, looking at websites, watching YouTube videos, etc. At that point we went in for quotations. Some companies were faster than others. Overall, that quotation period lasted around 4 to 5 weeks, which included time to get some questions answered, some time to get the quotes revised, etc. We placed our order in the 3rd week of June, and pretty quickly after that the supplier came out and did a detailed site survey, looked at the roof, looked at where the system might be installed in the garage, etc. Installation itself took place in the last week of July. Could actually have been a little bit sooner, but we weren't ready for it. Installation was done in one day, 6 to 7 hours in total. Team of 4, made up of 2 roofers and 2 electricians. They worked well and got on with the job. Didn't need to put up any major scaffolding, so we were lucky in that respect, and that probably helped from a timeline point of view. Although my background is in electrical engineering and project management, and so I have some relevant knowledge as to how these systems work, I was still keen that we get a decent handover of the system and instruction on how to use it, etc. Having chatted with a couple of people who weren't present when their systems were installed, not by the supplier we chose, I hasten to add, I would stress the importance of being there yourself, asking questions, getting some guidance, etc., as it seems relatively simple issues could have been more quickly resolved if they had a basic understanding of their systems. Okay, we spent quite a bit of time thinking about it and then doing our research. We spent the money and bought it. It's been installed. Does it actually work? In this section, I'm just going to look at the first month's data because I've got so much data to present that it needs to go into another video. August 2022, which if you cast your mind back was a pretty sunny month in the UK. What we can see here is data taken from the Solis Cloud webpage, and looking at it, the first thing that jumps out is that the system generated nearly half a megawatt hour. That's nearly 500 kilowatt hours of electricity. We couldn't believe that so much power could be generated in 1 month. A really good start then. In terms of how much of that power we were able to use, 83%. Pretty high. Some of it got exported. Not really quite sure why that was, but I suspect that we didn't have enough battery capacity. That already triggered some thoughts as to whether we need another battery, but we'll look at that in more detail in another video. Coincidentally, the amount of power that we generated was also 83% of our total consumption, with the balance of 17% coming from the grid. Overall, for a first month, we thought that was an impressive start, and hence we were very pleased. A great start then. Can we draw any conclusions from that? Is it too soon to judge whether the system is performing as well as we should expect, better than, or indeed worse? At this point, I should give a shout out to Gary from Gary Does Solar. I recommend you go and have a look at his channel. He's got some really good videos discussing all things solar. In one of his videos, he pointed to this tool that the European community have put together, which allows you to get a detailed projection of the solar output you will likely experience in your specific location, i.e. latitude, longitude, and under your conditions, example roof pitch, etc. Potential advantage over the Energy Savings Trust calculator is that this tool gives a month-by-month breakdown of the projected output, allowing us to better compare how the system is performing throughout the year. Now, because our panels are split into 2 banks, one east facing and one west facing, it was necessary to use the tool twice, once for each bank, specifying the relevant orientation in each case. This isn't difficult and just requires adding the projected output for each bank together to get the overall figure for the system. For August, across both banks, the tool totaled up to just a 400 kilowatt hours. With 493 kilowatt hours actually generated, that's about 25% higher, this was definitely a good start. I'll be using this tool again for the 6-month review, which will hopefully follow shortly, so that we can look at a month-by-month comparison of what we've generated since August last year, that's September through to February, compared to the projection from the tool. That's going to be very interesting and I'm looking forward to doing that. But for now, this was a great confidence builder. It indicates that the panels are working well, the inverter's working well, and we're getting power from the system. Time for some final thoughts then. Are we happy with the decision we made? Absolutely. So far, we're very pleased. We like the ease of use of the inverter, how well the system appears to operate, and not least of all, the power we're getting from it. Would we have done anything different? Ideally, more panels and more battery capacity, but you have to choose your system to fit your budget. It doesn't mean we couldn't expand the system in the future, and we're already quite seriously considering having another battery module, even at this early stage. I'd therefore encourage you to push for as many panels and as much battery capacity as you can realistically afford, as getting these as part of the initial system installation is probably the most cost-effective approach. Any issues of note? Well, I'll go into this in more detail in the 6-month review, but to be quite honest, no. We've had a couple of small issues with the Solis Cloud app, but nothing too problematic, and nothing to do with the system hardware itself. At this point, I'd really like your feedback, maybe about the process that we followed, the reasons why we chose solar, and the system we chose. Would you do something different? Have you done something different? Very interested to get your comments. I'm looking forward to that very much. So, as we get to the end of the video, I'd just like to say thanks for watching. I hope you've found it interesting and informative. I'm hoping to have the 6-month review out very soon with much more data. Also, a discussion about how you get your export payments, which wasn't straightforward for us, and whether it's time for an additional battery, and much more. So thanks for watching again. Hope to see you soon. Please subscribe. Catch you next time.